After being hospitalized and recuperating at my parents' home due to an illness contracted from my husband, I returned to our apartment for the first time in a while to find a pile of unopened mail. Among the stack was a termination notice for my husband, Kevin. What in the world happened? I decided to give him a call. Alice? What's up, calling in the middle of the day like this? Just had something to ask. Where are you now? At the office? I'm in Miami for a business trip today. You got something to say? I'm in the middle of a meeting, don't bother me now. Sure. As I weakly responded, the call ended. This is ridiculous. What is he up to? Confused, I called his former boss, Mark. After hearing the story, he was shocked and offered an explanation. He also added, Alice, are you planning to stay at your parents' place for a while? Yes. I'm thinking about divorcing him. I see. How about we join forces then? His words ignited a spark of retaliation against Kevin within me. My name is Alice Thompson, a 38-year-old housewife. Though, I'm not exactly a housewife, nor am I employed at the moment. What do you call a housewife who is recuperating at her parents' house? About 6 months ago, I collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. While my post-surgery recovery has been positive, various circumstances led me to quit the job I had. Now, I spend my days recuperating at my parents' home in the neighboring state. Kevin and I used to work at the same trading company. I met him 10 years ago. He was a promising salesperson in the company, and I was part of the administrative department. We had no particular interaction before that. Our relationship started unexpectedly at the company's New Year's party. In a company with many employees, it was customary to rent a hotel hall for a standing party. During the party's bingo game, we both won at the same time, which led to our first conversation. Our relationship developed across different departments, and we got married in less than 2 years. Perhaps the fact that I was nearing 30 also played a part in deciding to get married. He visited my parents' home, a traditional woodworking shop in the neighboring state, to formally ask for my hand in marriage. During that visit, my brother, who is 4 years older, sternly warned him, if you make her unhappy, I won't let you off easy. His intimidating presence is something I still remember vividly. He was already married, but even my sister-in-law cheerfully says, you have a sister complex. Highlighting how he's always been sweet to me and looked after me since we were kids. Yes, that's the kind of family I come from. Parents, grandparents, my brother and his wife, and their children lived on our property. And it's not just that. The artisans lived with us as well. Our family home sits on a large piece of land. In fact, it backs onto a forest. I've always loved the rustling sound of leaves and the clattering of branches in that forest. I would have liked to become a craftsperson myself, but unfortunately, I was clumsy. And I lacked strength. Woodworking is quite a demanding task. Our family handles everything from delicate to more practical, robust woodworking. My father is well known in the area for his delicate woodworking. His creations are truly beautiful. On the other hand, my brother followed in our grandfather's footsteps, focusing on more practical woodworking. My father's work involves crafting delicate baskets and ornamental items from slender bamboo strips measuring 1 to 2 millimeters in width. But that's not all. He once accepted a city commission to create a large-scale sculpture. I was moved by the piece, which combined his signature delicacy with boldness. On the other hand, the woodworking my brother does is primarily utilitarian. For instance, he makes large baskets for farmers to use for sun-drying crops. Sturdy baskets with solid handles. And large round baskets with straps for carrying on the back. Sometimes, people come to him with special orders for items that used to be made in the past but are no longer available. He recreates items that were commonplace in bygone days but have since disappeared. Growing up watching our grandfather work, my brother chose this path, distinct from my father's. The way he skillfully splits the wood he's cut into equal parts to make several meters of bamboo strips, and swiftly weaves a basket, is truly admirable. But Alice, don't get too close just because it's interesting. He would often warn me. When I asked why, he'd say, wood is flexible and soft. But the thin strips you'd handle with your bare hands can cut you. Through his training, his hands had become tough, immune to minor injuries. However, I once cut my finger on a bamboo strip less than 1 millimeter thick while trying to weave a round basket. My brother made quite a fuss about it. If I weren't so clumsy, I would have made it myself. Before that, you'd need the physical strength. Indeed, that was also a factor. Cutting, carrying, splitting, peeling, weaving, the wood is heavy before it dries. These tasks require significant physical effort. That's another reason why I gave up. It was because I gave up that I went on to find a job outside and then got married. But perhaps that marriage was only truly harmonious in the beginning. It was about 6 months ago that I fell ill. There were indeed some warning signs regarding my health. But I found it hard to speak up, especially with Kevin always so busy. And not just to him. To my in-laws as well. After 7 to 8 years of marriage without having any children, my kind in-laws told me not to worry, saying that children are a blessing that come in their own time. I didn't want to worry them further. Caught up in our careers, neither of us brought up the topic of starting a family. No, it's more accurate to say I chose not to bring it up. Maybe that's why we never had children. I began to accept this and started neglecting my gynecological health checks. Then one day, I collapsed at work, struck by severe abdominal pain, fever, and low blood pressure. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital bed. Pain coursed through my body as the anesthesia wore off. According to Dr. Miller, who was in charge of my case, I had developed peritonitis. I was rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. The whole situation came as a shock to me. Indeed, I hadn't been feeling well at the time. Especially regarding my gynecological health. I've always had difficult periods, so I thought the discomfort I was feeling was just part of that. But I was wrong. Chlamydia, you say? It was an unexpected diagnosis of a sexually transmitted disease. And from it stemmed other complications. Cervicitis leading to pelvic inflammation and eventually to peritonitis. He mentioned that the diagnosis came a bit too late. Kevin was promptly tested as well and turned out positive. In his case, however, it hadn't progressed to a full-blown infection. Since getting married, and even a few years before that, I hadn't been with anyone else. And the symptoms started appearing only in the last year or two. That meant Kevin was the only possible source. He did say it was tough on me being in the hospital, but he didn't say much more than that. Even though this situation made it certain I could never have children. I was upset, but at the time, I didn't confront him about being the cause. It would have been easy to ask where he picked it up. But I didn't have the courage back then. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a mistake during a moment of weakness, perhaps due to stress. I later thought how naive I had been. Regardless, it was clear he had been with someone else. During my hospital stay, I was mostly in a daze. The fact that I had contracted an STD and the certainty that I could no longer have children weighed heavily on me. I had given up on the idea of having children. But that was due to the dwindling relationship with him, not because of any physical issues. I never expected my body to put a full stop to it. I spent my days in the hospital bed engulfed in melancholy. Often, I found myself gazing aimlessly out the window. My mom came from the next state to be with me, but given the nature of my illness, we both ended up speaking very little. Then one day, Kevin said he would come to visit me. I was surprised he could come during the day but also pleased. I was hospitalized for a while, treated as being on medical leave. Days passed without seeing any familiar faces other than my mother's. My boss visited once, but we hardly spoke about the illness, making the conversation awkward. My colleagues from my department must have been too busy to visit, given my absence. There were no signs of anyone coming to visit. Of course, that was to be expected. Yet, I felt incredibly lonely during that time. So, I found myself peering out the window, eagerly awaiting Kevin's arrival. With each bus that came in, I scrutinized every individual who disembarked. Eventually, a car stopped in front of the hospital, and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Kevin. Maybe he got a lift from a colleague? As I watched, I caught my breath. He walked around to the driver's side, leaned in, and kissed a woman through the window. As they parted, she waved at him, her face slightly visible. It must be a mistake, a stranger, I must be seeing things. With that thought, I returned to my bed, and soon after, he arrived, asking if I was feeling any better today. I suppressed my urge to ask why he was here and engaged in conversation with him instead. Yet, for some reason, he never mentioned the illness, even though he must have been informed about it. And as my husband, Dr. Miller must have instructed him to take medication, since he was the likely source of the infection. Despite this, he never directed the conversation towards that topic. He doesn't offer me even a single word of apology. Instead, he worried about me with such confidence. I couldn't understand what he was thinking at all. That's why I couldn't bring myself to ask him about the scene I witnessed outside the window. Even if I confronted him, I was sure he would just brush it off nonchalantly. I was convinced of that. Once he leaves, I'm left with nothing but time to rest and nothing particular to do, leading me to just sit and think more and more about the life I've lived up until now. And about my future. And about Kevin. Was he really always busy with work, hardly ever coming home? Why didn't he seem to want children? And what about the future? How should I proceed now that having children is completely out of the question? How can I face his kind parents and tell them? Despite knowing he is at fault, I couldn't help but blame myself, dwelling on these thoughts day after day. One day, my brothers came over with my sister-in-law. It was their turn to give my ever-attentive mother a break. "You look surprisingly well, Alice," she exclaimed as she hugged me. "When we heard you collapsed and had emergency surgery, everyone was in a panic," my brother said, carrying some personal items my mother had asked him to bring. "But really, how terrible. What's he doing now?" He looked around irritably. "He's as busy as ever with work. You know, he's the head of the sales department now. But still." He seemed dissatisfied. "Alice, why don't you come home for a while after you're discharged? Dad and Mom are worried about you going back to your place alone." "That's right. You should just relax and let us take care of you for a while," she suggested. I thought that might be the case. After all, being alone and lost in thought wasn't a good situation for me. After being discharged, I moved some personal belongings and my computer out of my home with the help of my brother and his wife. I told Kevin I wanted to recuperate for a while. And also that I was leaving my job. "Yeah, you should take it easy," he responded, his reaction seeming detached given the magnitude of the situation. And still, I couldn't ask. Where did he pick up the disease? How much had he played around before we got married? Or even after? Who was the person who drove him to the hospital? There were so many questions I wanted to ask. But at that time, I was too scared to hear the answers. After moving back to my parents' house, I started sleeping in a separate guest house. My family home has a few small detached units, just enough for sleeping. They are meant for the young artisans who live and work with us. Located in the countryside of the state next to New York, far from the city's hustle and bustle, my family home is in a secluded area, making it a tough commute for young artisans. Going out for groceries requires a car. And since I don't have a driver's license, my sister-in-law takes me along when she goes shopping. My parents suggested I could just sleep in the main house, but there are my brother's children. 3 lively elementary school kids, a girl and 2 boys, it's quite lively. In this area, neighboring friends can only meet by racing their bicycles up hills. When these children return home, the siblings together create quite an uproar. And now, it's painful for me to see such children. I had casually hoped that someday I could have children of my own, but now that's become an absolute impossibility. I do love children. That's precisely why I find it hard to be around them at the moment. So, after meals, I retreat to the guest house and have started organizing files on my computer. Since there's no TV in the guest house, I've also started watching more videos than I used to. Eventually, I discovered a surprising demand for nature videos. On a whim, I recorded the rustling leaves and the clattering of branches with my phone and posted it on social media. To my surprise, the reception wasn't bad at all. Some even commented that the sound quality was good. Encouraged by this, I decided to start a video streaming channel as an experiment. Despite being new to this, the response wasn't bad. It seems many people find the same solace in these forest scenes as I do. I began to invest in equipment bit by bit from my own savings to capture video and sound. At night, I would edit this material and post it online every few days. This project gradually began to heal me. Initially, my parents and brother's family were puzzled by my activities. But after showing them the videos and the reactions, my brother suggested, "Why don't you handle the publicity for our workshop?" He mentioned that indeed, we have long-standing customers, and there's always a steady demand. However, it seems that artisans who come here have to search for our workshop somewhat blindly. So, he asked if I could showcase our products and the work environment to communicate that such things exist here. He wanted me to showcase our products and the workshop atmosphere to attract more interest. "Why haven't you done something like this before?" I asked. "Do you think we'd know how to do anything like this?" he replied. "Come to think of it, even though we have internet access, it's the kind of place where kids barely play any video games. Indeed, even in this modern era, there are those who have no connection to it." I agreed without hesitation. And so, I officially became a member of this workshop. But this means I'll have to talk to him once, I realized. Indeed, you will. Both my parents and my brother and his wife agreed with this decision. So, I decided to return to our home in the city. But I was surprised upon my return. Despite having lived in central New York for a long time, just a short distance away, the air felt completely different. Entering the apartment, I found a pile of unopened mail spilling out of the mailbox. Carrying those items, I made my way up to my apartment. Unlocking and entering my home, it had been nearly 6 months since it was last occupied, due to my hospitalization. Perhaps because of this prolonged absence, the air in the room felt strangely unwelcoming. Or rather, it felt different. Unsettling. With a rustle, I set the mail on the living room table and opened a window. I needed to air out the apartment. When people live in a place, their unique scents permeate the space. But now, I couldn't detect the familiar scent of Kevin and me living here. Driven by a sudden impulse, I headed to the bedroom. As soon as I opened the door, I instinctively covered my nose and mouth. A woman's scent, not mine, lingered in the air. How dreadful. I quickly shut the door and returned to the living room. Sitting down, I slumped forward onto the table. Then, a piece of mail caught my eye. It was from the company. Perhaps they sent the withholding tax forms I'd need after resigning. Picking it up, I noticed there were 2 identical envelopes. One was addressed to me, and the other to Kevin. I opened the one addressed to me first. Inside was the expected withholding tax form. But there was more. Notice of company bankruptcy and merger procedures. Bankruptcy? Wait a minute. I stared at the words in disbelief. How could that large company have gone under? And then the other envelope. Reluctantly, I opened his letter. I know it's wrong to open someone else's mail. I understand that. But at that moment, my curiosity got the better of me. Why would they send identical envelopes at the same time? If it was a similar notice, wouldn't he have received it in person at the company? The content of the opened envelope was a termination notice. The company had gone bankrupt. But this wasn't some small office. It was a large company with many employees in each department. Even in bankruptcy, if there was a company willing to absorb it, mass layoffs wouldn't be so straightforward, would they? Feeling something bubbling up inside me, I decided to call Kevin. Since moving back to my parents' home, we had exchanged some messages, but I had hardly called him directly. But now seemed like the right time. After a few rings, he answered. "Alice? What's up, calling in the middle of the day like this?" His voice sounded slightly irritated. Just had something to ask." "Where are you now?" "At the office. I'm in Miami for a business trip today." "You got something to say?" "Ah, yes. A business trip?" What was he talking about? "I'm in the middle of a meeting, don't bother me now." "Sure." I responded weakly, and the call ended. A business trip? A meeting? I couldn't make sense of it. After pondering for a moment, I decided to call Mark, a former boss from my previous job. It connected surprisingly quickly. This is Alice. It's been a while." "Alice. I could hear the clamor of people in the background. Surprised, Mark moved to a quieter spot. Once the background noise had quieted down, he began the conversation anew. What's going on? I sent you your withholding tax form a little while back. Oh, actually, I've been staying at my parents' home for quite some time, and I just came back here today for some errands. I see. Yes. And today, I noticed the mail from your side for the first time. About my husband's termination notice? Huh? Mark seemed unsure of how to respond. Alice, haven't you heard? What are you referring to? He was leaking our client's information to a rival company. I gasped. The story Mark was explaining sounded like a joke to me, who had been living peacefully in a different world until now. I've been recuperating at my parents' home, so this is really news to me. I could hear a sigh of exasperation. He explained. Kevin was rumored to be involved with Emily from the secretarial department. And when he disappeared from the company, she was also gone. Evidence of the information leak was found on her computer. Then, Kevin and Emily. It might be the other way around. According to the girls in the secretarial department, she had a boyfriend outside the company. A honey trap? Then the woman who had driven him to the hospital. Was that Emily? I called my husband earlier. Did he answer? A voice of surprise. I figured he must not have been answering calls from the company. He said he was on a business trip in Miami with a business partner. I see. He seemed to ponder for a moment. Alice, do you plan to stay at your parents' home from now on? Yes. I came back here to discuss this with him. I paused for a moment. Saying this would mean the end of everything. I'm thinking about divorcing him. I see. How about we join forces then? What he proposed to me was quite appealing. I checked the apartment for anything missing, took what I needed to take, and then headed to the courthouse first. To get divorce papers. But I requested 2 copies. I signed one and left it on the table. This isn't meant for immediate use. It's purely a declaration of my intentions. Then I placed the envelope containing the termination notice on top of it. Afterward, I bought a slightly better camera and microphone, and when my sister-in-law picked me up at the station, she said, I was surprised, I didn't expect you to come back just for the day. What happened? It's a bit of a long story, I'll tell you later. Really? But you seem to be in a good mood. Is that so? Maybe it is. I must be feeling somewhat relieved. Back at home, I immediately shared Mark's proposal with my family. Everyone simultaneously expressed their anger towards Kevin. How could he do that? That's terrible. So, you're planning to divorce him then? Yes. The apartment was filled with another woman's scent, and I don't know where he is now, but I don't think he's seen the termination notice. Is he running away? Maybe. But what will you do if he doesn't come back? He hasn't blocked my calls yet. It seems like he's avoiding calls from the company though. I then explained Mark's proposal to everyone. That's a great idea. So, we're doing it here, right? Can I tell the young artisans about this? Please do. He might act tough, but he's actually quite cowardly. About half a month later, Kevin and Emily finally showed up at my family home. Or more accurately, they were brought here. They were led into the traditional spacious guest room of our old family house, where the artisans in their work clothes, my parents, and my brother and his wife were already waiting. James, the lawyer I hired for the divorce, was also there, ready and waiting. Mark came along with Michael, a lawyer affiliated with the company. Kevin, Emily, and another man. All 3 had grim expressions. But while Kevin and Emily's faces showed fear, the other man seemed filled with anger. First, we'd like to discuss the divorce matter of the Thompson couple. James began, confronting Kevin with the reasons for the divorce. First, the affair with Emily. Kevin, you claimed to be in Miami for business when Alice called you the other day. However, you had already been fired from the company at that time. Are you saying that's proof of the affair? No, that's just an additional point. A point? Yes. The affair is one reason for the divorce, but the main reason Alice is citing is that you transmitted an STD to her. An STD, you say? At that, Emily let out a shocked exclamation. What do you mean by that? You didn't know? I tried to keep my tone calm as I addressed her. No, what? You took him to visit me in the hospital, didn't you? How do you know that? So it was you driving the car that time. That's unfortunate. Why am I the unfortunate one here? Because, the reason I was hospitalized was due to chlamydia, which I contracted from him, and it developed into peritonitis. Chlamydia, you say? She suddenly turned to Kevin. It seemed she knew exactly what that meant. Yes, and as a result, I've become completely infertile. But you're still young, so if there was anything between you two, you need to get treated quickly, don't you think? What? Sweat glistened on her face. She looked between the two men. Why didn't you tell me about this? She muttered resentfully to Kevin. I had already started taking medication by then. What? You mean you started taking it when you went to see your wife? What about me then? So, you're implying there was a relationship between you two before that? James interjected calmly. So that's how it is, Emily. The other man glared at them with disdain. I did tell him to get data for me, sure. But I never told him to bring back a disease. And who are you? I asked. Well, that's where our part comes in. Mark leaned in. This is John, an assistant manager at the headquarters that absorbed our bankrupt company. He politely introduced himself to me. And why is he involved? That's because. Let me explain. I used Emily, my girlfriend, to gather information about your company. So, she was acting as a spy. Yes, I know it's a poor excuse, but I didn't direct her to take any specific actions. Indeed, it was just as he said, a lousy excuse. So, you didn't expect Emily to get involved with Kevin to this extent? I considered it a possibility, but I also thought she wouldn't go that far since she was with me. He must have assumed she wouldn't cross that line. As a result, the sales information Kevin provided brought significant benefits to us. So, one of the reasons our company went under is right here. Mark stated bitterly. Well, this company did end up absorbing ours, and except for the top management, it didn't really harm anyone else. It might even be better than our previous top management in many ways. Is that so? I sighed in relief, thinking of my former colleagues. However, it was wrong to go about it this way. What goes around comes around, after all. John said with a wry smile. Could it be, John? Yes, exactly that. I've been feeling off lately and got tested, and sure enough. At that revelation, Emily gasped, her eyes widening in shock. That's right. I got it from you. Then that means She started to tremble. Well, it's good it was found early, but how long were you two involved? Don't you have anything gynecological that comes to mind? She could only moan in response for a while before suddenly raising her hand and slapping Kevin across the face. What are you doing? Shut up. It's your fault. Why didn't you tell me? That's because. Well, it's a difficult disease to talk about, isn't it? James intervened. We don't know where you contracted the disease, but it's clear that you transmitted it to Alice. That's the primary reason for the divorce. We will be filing for divorce and demanding alimony from Kevin. Not for the affair? The affair is obviously included. You're the one who brought the disease from someone else. But Alice could have had it, right? I used to visit the gynecologist regularly until I gave up on having children, to check if there was any issue with me. Indeed, it wasn't like we didn't spend any time together as a couple. It would have taken about a year for the infection to worsen to this extent. Which coincides with when I started skipping my gynecology visits after giving up on having children. During that time, you were frequently away on business trips. I don't know where you went or what you did, but you were certainly with someone else, weren't you? At our company, there are records that we didn't assign you that many business trips at that time. Mark added. Furthermore, both you and Emily will be sued for leaking confidential business information. That's why we brought Michael, the lawyer affiliated with the company. Me too. Of course. You were initially asked to do this, weren't you? But well, there's a bit of responsibility on our side regarding Emily's matter. We can somewhat defend her on that point. However, as a boyfriend, I can't forgive you for going that far. Why? I just thought it was for your sake. You thought pillow talk was the best approach? There were smarter ways to do it. I heard rumors about you not getting along with your wife. When I approached you, you fell for it easily. You were with me with that intention? Of course. John was always my main focus. Why would I seriously get involved with a married old man? At that moment. Enough. My father bellowed, silencing the room. What's all this nonsense about? Our artisans straightened their backs and stared disapprovingly at the disgraceful trio. Kevin. Alice has already said she doesn't want to be with you. Just sign the divorce papers already. Father. I've already contacted your parents yesterday. It seems you've been running away from them too. What? Your family said they won't help you at all. Is that so? Sign this. James placed another set of divorce papers in front of Kevin. That's when it happened. Ah. Suddenly, he screamed, stood up, and dashed outside barefoot. After him. My father ordered my brother and the artisans. Their trained movements were swift. We moved to the porch and watched the men running towards the forest. Then someone shouted, "Kevin," and a loud crashing noise followed. Kevin had stumbled into a pile of recently cut timber. Help me. The fresh wood, still heavy with moisture, had fallen on him, a pile of 20 or 30 logs. I sighed, resigning myself to the situation. Afterward, he fractured his leg when a large amount of timber fell on him all at once. He also suffered bruises in various places. Our divorce was successfully finalized. I sold the apartment we lived in to pay the alimony in one lump sum. After all, he would face more financial issues. The damage claims from Mark and the others. Since this is going to court, it's uncertain how long it will take or how much will need to be paid. With his injuries and the ongoing lawsuit, it seemed he was struggling to find employment. As for Emily, rushing to the gynecologist, she discovered early symptoms of chlamydia and was horrified to think what might have happened if left untreated. She too was fired from her job and faced an upcoming lawsuit for damages. John sought a lawyer for her, but their relationship appeared to have ended. Hearing all this, I was thoroughly disillusioned with his attempts to dismiss the disease. Since then, I've started working as a publicity staff for my family's workshop, alongside my video streaming. I enjoy showcasing my father's delicate crafts and my brother's robust utility items. Lately, I've even captured children engaging in simple woodworking on camera. Thinking about my health still causes some pain. But I can't dwell on it alone forever. The forest videos I've been posting continue to receive positive feedback, with comments coming in not just from within the country but also from abroad. Many people seem to enjoy those sounds that I so love. This has become my new purpose in life. I've also started having personal conversations with one of the artisans. While I'm not thinking about remarriage or anything, who knows what the future holds. The forest offers a different melody every day. I wish for nothing more than to continue these peaceful days.